A brown molded cafeteria tray with 5 compartments rolled off a Cambro line in April 1986 and arrived in a school in Akron, Ohio, the following Monday. For 17 years, that tray carried the same 5 lunches in the same rotation, served by 3 women in hairnets to kids who grew up and sent their own kids through the line. Number 19 cost the school 65 cents per serving in 1987. Number 14 was the lunch every kid traded their dessert for. Number 8 on this list was the entree the gym teacher ate alongside the children, like he was one of them, because it was the only thing on the line he liked. These 25 lunches fed 27 million kids for 2 decades. And then, the USDA changed the rules and the trays went empty. Hit subscribe and stay with us. Here are the 25 forgotten 1980s school lunches. Number 25. Tomato soup with a grilled cheese triangle. The soup came from a number 10 can of Campbell's condensed, thinned with whole milk in a steamed kettle the size of a kitchen sink. The cheese was a half slice of American on white bread, grilled in butter on a flat top until your bread shattered when you bit into it. Lunch ladies cut every sandwich on the diagonal because the triangle dipped cleaner than the square. The ladle held 4 ounces, served into a 5-ounce bowl with a paper napkin folded under it. You dipped one corner, then another, and learned the order by 2nd grade. Today, the same lunch would fail 4 federal rules at once. Whole milk in the soup, white bread, butter on the griddle, and canned sodium together push past 740 milligrams. And whole grain bread now carries the sandwich. The original belongs to memory. Number 24. Fish sticks with tartar sauce. They came frozen in a wax-lined case of 200, breaded, golden, and rectangular, baked on a sheet pan for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Friday was fish day in most American school districts because the Catholic kids needed the option, and once your kitchen was set up for them, the rule stayed for everyone. The tartar sauce was a paper cup of mayonnaise and pickle relish from the lunch lady's own bowl. 3 sticks per tray, a scoop of mac and cheese on the side, a square of cornbread. Kids who grew up watching Friday fish trays slide down the line still smell the lemon wedges when they pass a freezer aisle. The fish came from Atlantic pollock fillets caught off Massachusetts. By 2014, the breading carried too much sodium for elementary trays. The recipe simply walked off the menu. Number 23. Salisbury steak with brown gravy. The patty was beef and breadcrumb, shaped in a press and frozen flat, then baked from frozen for 40 minutes in a deep hotel pan. The gravy came from a sealed pouch of mushroom and onion base, mixed with hot water and stirred with a wooden paddle long enough to coat the back of a ladle. Cafeteria recipes from the 1988 USDA Quantity Cookbook called for 1 pound of meat to feed 5 kids, which made Salisbury steak the cheapest hot entree on the line. You either loved it or refused to eat it, and the lunch ladies could tell by 3rd grade which side of that line you were on. The patty went on mashed potatoes with green beans alongside, the gravy ladled across both. By the time the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act took effect in 2012, Salisbury steak carried more sodium than the new rules allowed. The wooden paddles went into storage. Number 22. Tater tots. They arrived in a 15-pound box from Ore-Ida, frozen into perfect cylinders the size of a child's thumb. The cafeteria oven held 6 sheet pans at once, 400 degrees for 20 minutes. No flipping required. A scoop and a half went on each tray, salted from a steel shaker the lunch lady refilled every morning before the bell. Tater tots were the side that made every other side acceptable. You would push the corn around the compartment and eat the tots first, then dip the Salisbury steak in ketchup and eat it second, then drink the milk last. The pattern was as fixed as the bell schedule. Modern cafeteria fryers have been removed from most American elementary schools under the saturated fat rules, but the tots survive in some districts only as baked oven varieties, drier and lighter. The crispness is gone. Number 21. The Sloppy Joe Sandwich. The recipe ran in the 1988 USDA Quantity Cookbook on a single page. 25 pounds of ground beef, 4 cans of tomato sauce, brown sugar, vinegar, mustard, onion, and Worcestershire. The mixture simmered in a tilt skillet for 40 minutes, then went into a hotel pan with a pair of long-handled scoops. A kindergartner got 1 scoop on a hamburger bun. A 6th grader got 2. The bun soaked through by the time your tray reached the table, and the only way to eat it was with a fork. Many older Americans still call it a manwich, like the Hunt's brand on the home shelf. The sodium count on a single Sloppy Joe ran past 900 milligrams, which the 2012 standards capped well below. Number 20. Chicken pot pie. The crust was a sheet of pie dough laid flat across a deep hotel pan, and your filling was a thick stew of diced white meat, peas, carrots, and a roux made from chicken fat and flour. The whole pan baked for 45 minutes until the crust browned in patches. A square spatula cut servings the size of a paperback book. Steam came up off the gravy when your crust broke open. Cafeteria pot pie was one of the few items that crossed every American region with the same recipe, like a weather map drawn in pastry, because the USDA distributed surplus chicken to schools under the same commodity program from 1955 onward. The pies stopped appearing on most lines after 2012 because the crust carried too much saturated fat. Districts replaced them with chicken stew over a whole grain biscuit. Number 19. Rectangle cheese pizza. A frozen sheet of par-baked dough, 14 inches by 20, came stacked 12 to a case from a regional supplier. The kitchen ladled tomato sauce from a tilt skillet, spread it with the back of a serving spoon, then covered the whole sheet with 1.5 pounds of low-moisture mozzarella from a 5-pound bag. 8 minutes at 500 degrees, then the cook pulled the pan and cut it into 24 perfect rectangles with a long-handled wheel cutter. Each rectangle weighed about 4 ounces. In 1987, the line cost added up to 65 cents per serving, like a coin you could trade across the lunchroom. That was the cheapest hot entree the federal program allowed. The crust was thicker than a takeout pizza, almost focaccia, with a thin glaze of oil on the bottom from the parchment. The cheese cooled into a single rubbery layer that you could lift in one piece and eat folded over. Friday was rectangle pizza day in most American districts. Kids who hated the spinach side and pushed the orange wedge to one corner would still finish your rectangle pizza in 3 bites and ask whether seconds were left in the warming line. Lunch ladies learned to count the rectangles by the 3rd class through because the 8th grade boys came through last and would eat anything still warm. The recipe came from a 1988 USDA standardized cookbook distributed to school food service directors across all 50 states. Sister Mary Catherine, in a Cleveland parochial school, used the same recipe word for word, only doubled. The 2012 nutrition standards changed all of it. The dough now must be whole grain rich, the cheese must be reduced fat, the sodium per serving must come in under 480 milligrams. The original rectangle pizza carries closer to 700 milligrams in a single piece. What most people forget is that the cheese formula itself changed too, not just the crust. A modern version exists, made with cauliflower flour and reduced sodium cheese. But the texture and the smell are not the same. A child from 1986 would not recognize the slice on your tray. Number 18. The corn dog on a stick. They came frozen, 80 to a case. The cornmeal batter already wrapped tight around a beef and pork frankfurter on a wooden skewer. The cafeteria oven baked them on parchment for 18 minutes. Then a kitchen worker tonged them onto trays 2 at a time. Mustard came in foil packets you tore open with your teeth. The wooden stick was the part most kids fought over after the dog was gone because you could prop it in a milk carton and pretend it was a flag. Corn Dog Day was usually a Wednesday on the 4-week rotation, paired with baked beans and a peach half. The cafeteria version was always oven-baked, like a leaner cousin to keep the saturated fat under the federal cap. By 2014, the breading tested above the new sodium limits. Most districts pulled it from your menu and never put it back. Number 17. Spaghetti with meat sauce. The pasta came in 20-pound bags of dry strands, boiled in a 30-gallon kettle until a piece thrown at the wall stuck for 1 second and slid off. Kids who walked past the kitchen at 10 in the morning could smell the simmering tomato and oregano halfway down your hallway. The sauce was ground beef, canned tomato puree, garlic powder, oregano, and a pinch of sugar. A wire scoop fished portions of pasta out of the kettle, like a net pulling shells from surf, and a 6-ounce ladle dropped sauce on top. The serving line moved fast on spaghetti day. Kids with braces dreaded it and ate the garlic bread first. Sister Joan, in a Pittsburgh Catholic school, served the same plate every Tuesday for 19 years, with a sprinkle of dried parsley, because she said it made the sauce look fresher. The 2012 standards limited white pasta to 1 serving a week per child, and the recipe disappeared from most menus. Number 16. Chicken nuggets with dipping sauce. They came in 5-pound bags of frozen breaded white meat, 28 nuggets per pound, baked on parchment-lined sheet pans for 12 minutes at 450 degrees. Your dipping sauce was barbecue or honey mustard from a half-gallon jug, portioned into 1-ounce paper soufflé cups. 5 nuggets per tray for elementary, 7 for middle school. Chicken Nugget Day was the most predictable attendance day on the cafeteria calendar because almost no kid stayed home or brought a sack lunch that morning. The dinosaur-shaped version most adults remember today did not appear in school cafeterias until 1993. Through the 1980s, the nuggets were always the same uniform oval, slightly puffed at the seam, like a leaf folded once where the breading press closed. The 2012 sodium and saturated fat rules forced manufacturers to reformulate the breading. The crunch is softer and the salt is missing. Number 15. Chicken patty on a bun. The patty was a perfectly round disc of pressed white meat, breaded and frozen, baked on a sheet pan in batches of 40 for 15 minutes. It went on a soft white bun with a leaf of iceberg lettuce and a single slice of pickle. No mayonnaise, no mustard, no condiment unless you asked. The patty was so round and uniform that you sometimes pulled it out of your bun and held it up like a coin. A kid in Tulsa or Tallahassee or Toledo could walk into any school cafeteria in 1987 and find the same chicken patty on the same bun, because all of them came from 3 commodity processors contracted by the USDA. The breading carried too much sodium under the 2012 standards. A whole grain bun replaced the white bun. The new version sits softer in the bun. Number 14. The peanut butter bar with chocolate frosting. The bar was one of the most beautiful objects a 1980s cafeteria ever produced, and every child knew it. The recipe lived on a single index card in the lunch lady's binder. 1 pound of butter, 3 cups of peanut butter, 4 cups of powdered sugar, 6 cups of graham cracker crumbs, all mixed by hand in a stainless bowl the size of a baby bath. The mixture was pressed into a half-sheet pan, half an inch thick, then topped with melted milk chocolate and butter, smoothed flat with the back of a long spatula, and chilled in the walk-in for 2 hours. The lunch lady cut it into 36 perfect rectangles with a knife dipped in hot water between every cut. A single bar weighed nearly 3 ounces and tasted like a Reese's cup pressed into a brick. Kids traded their orange wedges, their carrots, their entire entree for an extra peanut butter bar. A second grader in Akron once kept hers in your lunchbox for 3 days and rationed it in pencil eraser-sized bites because she did not believe she would ever taste anything that good again. The peanut butter bar appeared on the 4-week rotation exactly twice a month, and on the morning the bar was on your menu, attendance in some elementary schools rose by 7%. Older lunch ladies were said to bake an extra pan and tuck it into the warming oven for the teachers, because the teachers traded for them too. The bar had everything a 1980s child wanted in a single object. It was sweet, it was rich, it was salty under the chocolate, and it filled a small hand. And then in 2014, the new federal Smart Snacks rule capped your dessert serving at 200 kilocalories and limited the sugar to 35% of total weight. The peanut butter bar carried 460 kilocalories and well over half its weight in sugar. It was pulled from cafeteria lines in most American districts within 18 months. The recipe survives only in church cookbooks and in PTA fundraisers, and in the memories of the kids who walked past the dessert window in 1986 and saw the chocolate gleaming under the lights like a window in a candy store. Number 13. Mashed potatoes with brown gravy. The potatoes came as dehydrated flakes in a 50-pound bag from the USDA commodity program, reconstituted with hot water, butter, and a splash of whole milk in a steam kettle. A wire whip on a long handle blended them in 3 minutes. The brown gravy came from a powdered base, mixed with hot water in a smaller pot. A number 12 scoop dropped a perfect dome of potatoes on each tray like a small white hill, and a 4-ounce ladle covered it with gravy. The gravy ran down the slope and pooled in the corner of your compartment, and you would dip a tater tot in it before the corn even hit the tray. The 2012 standards did not pull mashed potatoes outright, but the powdered gravy disappeared because of the sodium count. The new gravy is thinner and tastes nothing like the version a 1986 kid remembers. Number 12. The Square Cafeteria Hamburger. The patty was 4.5 ounces of frozen ground beef, pressed flat in a perfect square the size of a playing card, baked on a sheet pan in batches of 40 for 12 minutes. The bun was a square white roll cut to match. You asked for ketchup and mustard from the condiment table and squirted both from giant pump dispensers. The square hamburger was a Wednesday lunch in most districts because the round buns came in on Tuesday and went out for the chicken patty. The cafeteria simply ran out of round buns and used squares for the hamburger, so nothing went to waste. A kid eating one in 1986 thought it was the most natural shape for a burger, like a window pane between bread, because you had never seen another. By 2014, your bun had to be whole grain rich, and the patty had to be 90% lean. The square shape was abandoned because the new bun came pre-cut and round only. Number 11. Macaroni and cheese. The neon yellow color was as much a part of the dish as the noodles, and every American kid in the 1980s knew the exact shade. The recipe came from the 1988 USDA cookbook. 18 pounds of dry elbow pasta, a gallon of whole milk, 2 pounds of butter, and 4 pounds of processed American cheese cut into cubes. The batch baked in a deep hotel pan for 40 minutes until the top crusted into a thin orange sheet, like a small geological layer. A square serving spoon cut portions about the size of a coffee mug. You ate it with a fork and chased the noodles around the plate. The 2012 rules cut the saturated fat allowance per meal to under 10% of total kilocalories. The cheese in the original recipe pushed past 16%. The new mac and cheese is made with reduced fat cheddar and whole grain noodles, and the color is closer to ivory than neon. Number 10. Hot Dog Day. The Frankfurter was beef and pork, 6 inches long, served in a soft white bun with a paper boat under it to catch the drip. 2 foil packets of mustard and 1 of ketchup came on the side. Hot Dog Day was every other Thursday in most American districts, and the line moved faster on Hot Dog Day than any other day of the month because your tray took 30 seconds to plate. You could open both packets, squeeze the mustard down the length of the dog like a yellow seam, and finish the whole sandwich in 4 bites. By 2014, the federal sodium standards had cut the cafeteria Frankfurter from your menu because the cured meat carried too much sodium per ounce. A few schools held on for a year or two with a turkey hot dog substitute, but the kids did not bite. The hot dog tray was retired. Number 9. Tuna noodle casserole. A kettle of cooked egg noodles, 3 cans of cream of mushroom soup, 4 cans of chunk light tuna, frozen peas, and a handful of crushed potato chips on top for the crunch. The pan baked for 30 minutes until the chips browned. A square serving spoon cut portions about the size of a baseball. The smell of cream of mushroom and tuna filled the cafeteria from the first lunch period to the last, like a damp blanket on the air. Kids either loved it or refused to sit near anyone eating it, and the seating in your cafeteria reorganized itself by 10 in the morning on tuna noodle days. A grandmother in New Jersey made the same recipe at home from the same commodity ingredients because the USDA distributed the same cans to schools and to food banks. The 2012 standards reduced canned cream soup in school recipes because of the sodium. The casserole was quietly retired by the 2015 school year. Number 8. Beef goulash. The cafeteria called it goulash, but it was closer to American chuckwagon stew. Ground beef browned with onion, mixed with elbow macaroni, canned tomato sauce, garlic powder, oregano, and a teaspoon of sugar. The whole batch came together in a single tilt skillet in under 30 minutes. A wire scoop dropped a generous portion into the largest compartment of your tray. Goulash was the entree the gym teacher ate alongside the children, like he was one of them, because it was the only thing on the line he liked. The part most people forget is that he told the lunch ladies it reminded him of the meal his own mother used to make on a coal stove in Ohio in 1947, and he said it loud enough that the 8th graders heard him and started calling it gym teacher stew. The lunch ladies kept making it the same way for 12 years. By 2014, the recipe failed 3 federal rules at once. The white pasta was capped, the ground beef ran above the saturated fat limit, and the canned tomato sauce pushed past the sodium cap. The gym teacher retired the same year. Number 7. The half-pint chocolate milk carton. The carton was paper, coated in wax, with the school district logo printed on one side and the dairy supplier on the other. The chocolate milk was whole milk with cocoa and sugar, the kind of sweetness that tasted closer to melted ice cream than to drinking milk. You learned by 2nd grade how to open the carton without splitting the wax seam, peeling the top corner back with thumb and forefinger like prying a small clam. Chocolate milk was the currency of your lunch table. You would trade an entire dessert for a second carton on a hot day. The cafeteria worker behind the milk window kept count, because the federal rule allowed only 1 milk per tray. Whole chocolate milk was banned from American school cafeterias by the 2012 standards. The replacement is fat-free flavored milk. The taste is thinner. Number 6. The Lunch Lady Chocolate Chip Cookie. The cookie was 3 inches across, baked on a parchment-lined sheet pan in batches of 60, golden at the edges and chewy in the center. The recipe came from the 1988 USDA cookbook, a slight variation on the classic Toll House, but scaled up. 2 pounds of butter, 4 cups of brown sugar, 8 cups of flour, a dozen eggs, a tablespoon of vanilla, and 4 cups of semi-sweet chocolate chips. The dough came together in a 20-quart Hobart mixer, scooped onto pans and baked at 375 degrees for 11 minutes. You could smell the cookies from down the hallway and knew before the lunch bell rang that today was a good day. By 2014, the Smart Snacks rule capped your dessert at 200 kilocalories. The Lunch Lady cookie weighed in at 310. The cookies are smaller now. The smell does not travel as far. Number 5. Scalloped potatoes. Sliced russets layered in a hotel pan with butter, flour, salt, pepper, whole milk, and a bag of grated cheddar across the top. The pan baked for an hour at 350 degrees until the top browned and the milk thickened into a sauce that pooled around the slices. A square serving spoon cut portions about the size of a deck of cards. Scalloped Potato Day was a winter favorite because the steam off your pan filled the cafeteria with the smell of butter and cream, like a kitchen at Thanksgiving. The potatoes came from the USDA commodity program by the 50-pound bag and the cheese by the 5-pound block. By 2012, the recipe failed the saturated fat rule and the milk fat rule together. Most districts replaced scalloped potatoes with a roasted potato wedge, drier and lighter. A kid who ate them in 1986 still pictures the pool of sauce in your compartment. Number 4. Canned fruit cocktail. A number 10 can hold nearly 7 pounds of pears, peaches, grapes, pineapple, and a single cherry per ladle scoop suspended in heavy syrup. The lunch lady opened the can with a long-handled industrial opener and ladled the contents into paper cups for service. The cherry was the prize. Kids traded everything for the cherry. A kid who got 2 cherries by accident would carry the cup back to your table like a trophy. The fruit cocktail was on the menu 4 days out of every 5 because the syrup made it shelf-stable. By 2014, the added sugar limits cut fruit packed in syrup from elementary trays. The replacement is fruit packed in juice or in water, and the cherries are gone. The trophy disappeared. Number 3. Beefaroni rings. The cafeteria served a Chef Boyardee variant straight from the number 10 can, ladled into a hotel pan, and warmed in a steam table for an hour before service. The pasta rings sat in a thick orange tomato sauce flecked with crumbles of beef, like small life preservers in a busy harbor. You could lift 1 ring at a time on the tip of your fork. The serving was a half cup, beside a slice of garlic bread and a green salad with French dressing. Beefaroni was the lunch the kids who hated everything else still ate. The lunch lady knew on Beefaroni Day that the trash bin would be lighter than usual. By 2012, the canned pasta failed the sodium and the saturated fat standards at once. A new whole grain pasta in a thinner sauce replaced it. Number 2. Jell-O cubes with a swirl of whipped topping. The Jell-O came from a can of mixing powder and a kettle of hot water, poured into half-sheet pans, chilled in the walk-in for 4 hours, then cut into 1-inch cubes with a long knife. The lunch lady served 2 cubes per cup, topped with a 1/4 ounce of Cool Whip from a tub. Red was strawberry, green was lime, and you divided yourselves by color preference like a flag in your own hand. The cubes wobbled on the spoon. The Cool Whip was the only sweet topping in the cafeteria that did not come in a packet. You could make the cube quiver by tapping the spoon, and the entire table would lean in to watch. Jell-O cubes appeared on the cafeteria menu twice a week from 1955 through 2012. The 2014 Smart Snacks rule capped the sugar percentage in dessert servings, and the Jell-O cube failed by a wide margin. Whipped topping carried hydrogenated oil and was banned the same year. Number 1. Chicken fried steak with white country gravy. The cube steak was beaten flat with a pneumatic tenderizer, dredged in seasoned flour, dipped in buttermilk and egg, dredged in flour again, and pan-fried on a flat top until the crust set golden and crisp. The white gravy came from the pan drippings, flour, salt, pepper, and a half-gallon of whole milk whisked smooth like a winter sky thickening over a field. A 4-ounce ladle covered the steak, mashed potatoes alongside, with green beans for color. Chicken fried steak was a Friday lunch in most Southern American school districts and traveled north through the 1980s with the Federal Commodity Beef Program. A kid eating it in 1986 thought it was the best meal on your 4-week rotation. The crust shattered under a fork. By 2012, the recipe failed every nutrition rule the new act introduced. The breading carried too much sodium, the pan frying too much saturated fat, and the whole milk gravy too much milk fat. The recipe walked off the line and never came back. French bread pizza was not just a meal, it was an event. Every kid in the 1980s knew the thrill of seeing a halved loaf of crusty French bread slathered in red sauce, buried under gooey mozzarella, and dotted with slices of pepperoni or whatever toppings you had on hand. It baked quickly, smelled incredible, and had just the right amount of crunch and chew. It felt fancier than frozen pizza, more fun than takeout, and more customizable than anything else in the freezer. The sauce came from a jar, the cheese came from a bag, and the bread came from the bakery rack at the supermarket. But when it all came together, it felt like magic. Parents loved it because it was cheap and fast. Kids loved it because it felt like something made just for them. No one argued over slices because everyone got their own half. It was a Friday night tradition, a birthday party standby, and a backup plan for when real dinner plans fell through. It may not have been elegant, but it was full of joy. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. So people had some different ways of incorporating split pea soup and bread into their diets during the Depression. One of the most common ways to do it was to have the split pea soup just be a one-pot meal. Why did this work? Well, to save you a long story detailing why cooking it in one pot works, It was most usually prepared that way. Plus, the broth it would simmer in would work really well as a side. Season that with just some basic things like salt and pepper, and you have yourself a pretty full meal. The next thing to do was to crumble the bread into the soup and then pretty much just use it to thicken the soup. Sometimes people did this because otherwise the soup in question was just a little too runny and thin. How could it be anything else? You might be thinking of the typical, conventional soups we're used to, but this was literally just beans and water. Then still, there were people who used the bread as a topping, and they'd dip pieces of the bread, scoop up the peas, and make a bite out of it. It was switching things up in little ways like this that helped people keep their sanity intact through the back-to-back madness that was the 1930s. So you might notice that this issue where you need a lot of prep work for these dishes isn't exactly a unique one. Lots of dishes share it, and even cottage cheese and pineapple bowls have the same problem. Now, this dish was something that came out around the 60s and 70s, when Americans were really into trying out new things. One of the first things they opted for was pineapple, and this was thanks to Spam, which really made the American population warm up to an otherwise chronically detested fruit. This bowl was seen as healthy, full of protein, it was cold, and it could be prepared way ahead of time. The reason this lasted as long as it did was probably because of that, though only people that were super serious about their health and diet would be bringing this kind of stuff to the office. It wouldn't make sense to ignore the perfectly convenient, cheap, and delicious deli food on the corner of your office and go for a cottage cheese and pineapple bowl. Unfortunately, while this one has the convenience factor down, it couldn't last in the long haul because tastes have just changed too much from the days where bowls like this could work. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was the definition of fun food, half salad, half chaos, and all 1980s genius. The setup was simple. Ground beef cooked with taco seasoning, shredded lettuce, cheddar cheese, maybe some diced tomatoes or sour cream, and a big handful of nacho cheese Doritos. Some families mixed it all in a bowl. Others, the bold ones, served it straight from the bag. You would crunch up the chips, pour in the toppings, shake it up, and dig in with a fork. It was portable. It was messy. It was delicious. And it felt like breaking the rules in the best way. This was dinner that did not sit properly on a plate. It made kids excited to eat salad. It gave busy parents a break. And it tasted like everything good about the 1980s. Salty, cheesy, just a little bit ridiculous. You could call it a meal, a snack, or a party trick. But however it showed up, it never lasted long. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was food with a wink. You hear the name rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are, like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? So casseroles were definitely out of the question for most people. Yet a substitute that could fit into the picture was vegetable and noodle casseroles. Noodles were easy to make from scratch, and most people would even buy them in bulk because they hadn't suffered the worst of price hikes. That was reserved for things like good and common cuts of meat, which is part of why you'd never see your average, everyday casseroles on the table anymore. The best part of this dish was in two strengths that made it pretty much ideal for the Dust Bowl, though. Vegetable casseroles could be made with just about anything that people were growing in their victory gardens. Onions, olives, lettuces, and cabbages. If it's green and comes from the ground, you can put it in this casserole. Next, noodles were a filling thing to put in there too, because it kept your appetite down. fiber, you know? Same reason gym bros are always telling you to eat oatmeal in the morning, it's like nature's Ozempic. The second strength this dish had was that it was really something you could make in bulk. I mean, once people got to making this, they could make it for more than just their family. Do you know how big of a deal that is? To actually have more than you need in a time like the 1930s? People saw the advantages to dishes like these and started making them for the entire community, often sharing ingredients and vegetables. It was actually pretty wholesome, if only it weren't in one of the worst times of the 20th century. So, like I was just telling you, Spam used to be the next big thing, and for good reason too. We had things like Spam and cheese roll-ups. A typical 70s office lunch would look like slices of Spam that had been rolled up with mustard and cheese. Now, these could either be grilled to enhance the smokiness of the Spam and make it contrast nicer with the pineapple, or you could bake it so that the cheese would melt and the mustard would mix in with it better for an overall more well-rounded flavor. All things considered, this was on the right track. It was quick, it was tasty, it was healthy, and it was also what people needed during a time where re-entering the workforce was really hard and put a lot of people out of their usual routines. The thing is, America is known for fickle trends. We'll like something one day, swear by it the next, and forget it halfway into the night. Spam and cheese roll-ups were good, but they took a sideline and started being party food more than a work lunch. Chicken and rice. Bake with cream of mushroom soup was the casserole that cooked while you did anything else. Dump a few boneless chicken breasts into a baking dish. Add white rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and some water or broth. Stir, cover, bake. That was it. The rice soaked up all the flavor from the soup and the chicken, turning soft and creamy while the top browned just enough to give it texture. You would take off the foil and suddenly, dinner was ready. It did not ask for attention. It just quietly got the job done. If your parents worked long hours, this was the kind of meal that waited patiently in the oven. It was never flashy, but it was always there. It fed everyone at the table, left you full, and saved your family from another night of fast food. Chicken and rice bake was not about bold flavors or eye-catching colors. It was about consistency. It was about stretching a few cans and a handful of rice into something warm and whole. And somehow, it always worked. Brown Betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a Brown Betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the Brown Betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The Brown Betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like Apple Betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. Chili beans and crushed crackers were just another meal from the never-ending nightmare that was the 1930s, but this one's just a bit more special than the rest. Maybe it's the one that got away in the entire history of food in the States. Maybe it's just how it became a staple of the culture later on, but this one always stood out. Chili beans and crackers were more than just a way to fill up for the evening. They were sometimes all you had. It wouldn't be so irregular to come back home from work, the most grueling shift of the week now safely behind you, and immediately be greeted by a bowl of chili beans and crushed crackers. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a time when people's wallets ran dry, it was also a time when their fields did too. It was very common for crops to fail, and families would often just live off of the tiny bits they could salvage. Basically, chili beans were the only recourse left to people in times like that. The last line of defense, you could say. It wasn't expensive, it filled you up, and it tasted just a bit more normal than everything else. You could say it was probably one of the few things people were eating that actually even had any taste anymore. You could get the entire thing in about 15 cents, and it would make you a lot happier. Guess that's why people look back on it with so much sentimentality. What do you think? Any comforting memories you can stir up and associate with a bowl of chili beans? To start it off, we're going to keep it very healthy with egg salad stuffed tomatoes. This was supposed to be a really light twist on the usual egg salad, which, as far as salads went, performed really well. Now, tomatoes aren't exactly someone's first pick when it comes to eating healthy and making your food taste good. Do they work on things like pizzas and burgers? Of course, but they're always usually a background character, even in those types of dishes. Here, though, the tomato is supposed to be the star of the show. The thing is, you're eating a tomato that's been hollowed out completely and has been stuffed with egg salad. You ever seen those jalapenos that have been emptied out and stuffed with cheese or aromatics? It's kind of like that. Why did something like this ever go out of style? Well, in today's culture of waking up half an hour before your shift because you need every bit of sleep you can possibly imagine, it just doesn't make sense to have something that's so prep work heavy as your daily lunch. Tuna noodle casserole was either your favorite or your nightmare, but either way, it showed up often and meant you were home. The formula never changed. Egg noodles, canned tuna, frozen peas, and cream of mushroom soup all stirred together and baked until hot and thick. The finishing move? A crunchy crown of crushed potato chips, sometimes cornflakes, always something salty and golden. It came in a square dish that seemed bottomless. You would scoop out a portion and find yourself going back for more because it was weirdly addictive. Cheap, filling, and shelf-stable, it became the undisputed champion of weeknight meals for families trying to stretch a dollar. Some versions added chopped celery or onion. Others stayed true to the original, built on cans and carbs. It was a casserole that smelled like your grandmother's house. It could feed a family of 6 on pennies. And it tasted like a relic of a time when everything came from the pantry and nobody cared if the tuna was fancy. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. While I know for a fact you've definitely had some unappetizing meals, let's talk about some good rub. Sweet potato and corn chowder was one of the best things you could get for yourself. See, again, this was a lot like chili beans and crushed crackers. It was sustenance, it was filling, it was a friend to fall back on during hard times, but it was warm. No, I don't mean that it had a decently high temperature. I mean the kind of warmth you feel after having a good hangout with your friends, or a really good meal your mother cooked. Emotional comfort, joy, all that good stuff. Sweet potato and corn chowder was a soup that felt like a soup, and it was also something that really made you healthy as you regularly ate more of it. Plus, people began to grow sentimental attachments to their crops. You have to understand that these were not people who had been raised in the way of farming. Their hands had no calluses, and their eyes couldn't tell how deep you needed to plant a crop. They had a lot of trial and error before they could reliably start growing things like sweet potatoes and corn, and once they did, it tasted even better because they knew it was a result of their hard work. Chicken a la king and puff pastry was another little nugget of French culture and cuisine that served us pretty well. So the idea here this time was to stuff creamy chicken and mushrooms into one single pastry, and there would be lots of these individual pastries, each stuffed to the brim. By now, we're talking about somewhere along the 70s. America's always been a big fan of cream. There's really no denying that, but I would say that we've warmed up to mushrooms a lot more than we used to. I don't think they were not popular, but they weren't exactly a standout ingredient that would be making anyone's top 10 or top 5 either. Americans were changing their palates regarding mushrooms thanks to two things, though. One, they had built up a fondness for it thanks to how many Americans, especially ones living on the edges of urban hubs, relied on foraging wild mushrooms. Two, things like cream soups, such as cream of mushroom soups, were already making the pairing of cream and mushrooms popular. This take on puff pastry wasn't exactly a long shot, since the stage was pretty much mostly set. However, I think most people have opted for things like sandwiches and ordering takeout at lunch now, or just getting a coffee. Work culture's really changed, and having a full-fledged meal during your 15-minute break isn't the most appealing option to a lot of people nowadays. Lasagna with cottage cheese was the Italian-American supper shortcut that fed every crowd and saved every budget. Ricotta was pricey, cottage cheese, way cheaper, and almost always in the fridge, so families layered noodles, red sauce, ground beef, mozzarella, and cottage cheese into thick trays that baked into gooey, bubbling comfort. It was tangier than traditional lasagna, lighter in texture, and surprisingly addictive. The edges would get crispy, the middle would be molten, and the smell could drag anyone out of their bedroom and into the kitchen. Some people swore it was better than the real thing. Others would never admit they used cottage cheese, even if they loved the taste. But in the 1980s, this was the go-to lasagna for busy households that needed big flavor on a tight budget. It showed up at birthday parties, neighborhood potlucks, and Sunday dinners. It was easy to double, easy to freeze, and easy to love. So this is a bit of a tricky name to pronounce even when you give it a genuine try, but it's worth knowing about this dish because of how good it is. Ballymaloe Irish lamb stew is something that comes all the way from County Cork, and lamb stew is something that Americans welcome with very open arms. You can particularly find this dish being spread in droves around St. Patrick's Day in any Irish-American community. Whether you're in New Hampshire or Rhode Island, which even today have a pretty solid amount of Irishmen living in them, you're bound to run into a Ballymaloe stew once in a while. Despite how good of a stew it is, with tender carrots, potatoes, and tender strips of lamb, and how simple the preparation is since it relies mostly on the natural flavors present in the ingredients, this dish actually flopped once before. Well, I wouldn't say it was a true flop, but it did fade out of the memory of the general public before too. That was before the 20th century, but ever since then it has been seeing a bit of a revival thanks to social media and Ballymaloe House, which is what it's named after. Either way, this is one of the best recipes to ever come out of a family cookbook. And if you've ever had one while at an Irish friend's home, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, if corn was sitting pretty at number 1 in terms of what was easy to get, what would you say number 2 was? Well, historians would pretty much agree with potatoes being the popular choice. Particularly, having potatoes with onion soup and bread was another way for people to tick off 3 things from their daily routines: nutrition, a full meal, and enough food to go around the entire table. Potatoes were pretty much just 5 cents per pound, and this was right around the earliest years. The reason you wanted to keep a massive stock of these bad boys was because they were built for survival situations. They last like literally forever. I mean, I think I've had a few potatoes that have been around since the Prohibition. Secondly, their other name is versatility. Fry it, boil it, steam it, mash it, or dice it. Whatever way you repurpose a potato, you'll get a damned good meal out of it. Plus, the fact that they're full of carbs makes them one of the best things to eat during a drought because it keeps your appetite low. Bread and onions were pretty much priced around the same price point, and that meant that people were able to make a good soup out of the 3 pretty easily. Now let's be real. People were definitely lowballing their standards just to be able to enjoy the meal, especially after like the 56th time they had it, but it was still a lot easier to swallow than other alternatives. The phrase mock crab salad sandwich might invoke images of cheap sandwiches that were built to just look like a crab sandwich, but if I've earned your trust at all so far, then keep an open mind because this is actually a wonderful example of American ingenuity. So, Mock food came out as a result of the Depression. Most people just couldn't really afford things like crab or red meat or any kind of meat, really. I mean, with the war rationing and everything, you pretty much had what you could hunt in the wild and the cheap cuts of meat that no one would really buy. Mock food was a way for people to get some flavors they were sorely missing. It stayed a long while even after the Depression, since thanks to urbanization, there were less and less coastal cities, bodies of water, and more. Otherwise, there used to be a time where crab was so abundant that it was cheap. Anyway, for this mock food imitation, what people would do is use cod or haddock instead, and the salad was just a basic mayo-celery mix with French or vinegar dressing. You'd lay that on some soft rolls, and you'd actually have a pretty good dish. The thing is, mock food culture is entirely a thing of the past now, and most of these recipes have been lost. Chicken divan was the queen of creamy casseroles, a dish that somehow made broccoli feel like a luxury. Families would pile cooked chicken and steamed broccoli into a baking dish, then drown it in a sauce made from cream of chicken soup, a splash of sherry, and a heaping handful of shredded cheddar. It was finished with golden breadcrumbs and baked until bubbling. The name made it sound fancy, but it was pure 1980s comfort food, easy, affordable, and surprisingly rich. It could be made ahead of time, frozen, or doubled for potlucks. If your mother was trying to impress dinner guests without working too hard, this was what she made. Kids might have rolled their eyes at the broccoli, but by the second bite, nobody was complaining. The creaminess covered everything. Even if you hated vegetables, you liked this. It was the dish that made your mother feel like she was serving fine dining even when it came out of a can. I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was, but what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? So, you might be surprised to hear this one, but people actually got enough turnip stew and dumplings to make a meal out of it. You might be thinking dumplings sound pretty expensive for a time when the wins themselves were stacked against your bank account. But hear me out. Dumplings were actually insanely economical, and loads of Americans had begun to make real efforts to learn how to make some good ones. Dumplings used flour, water, fat, and some baking powder. All of this basically costs around 5 to 10 cents individually, minus the fat and water. Since people usually wouldn't have fat to work with, they'd use lard. People were making dumplings at home and mixing them up with stews, broths, and just about everything else they worked with. Now, turnips, on the other hand, those were the actual tricky things to get. It's exactly because they were easy to cultivate and one of the few things that actually worked with the climate of the Great Plains that people were so quick to ravage the stores for them. As a side effect of that, most people simply resorted to growing them in their gardens, because at least you'd know for a fact you'd wake up to some turnips. The next thing we have on the list is salmon croquettes with creamed spinach. Now, on paper, this sounds like just what you would need, right? It's salmon, so there's protein. It's creamed spinach, so you definitely have a side that's jam-packed with nutrition. I mean, it seems ideal. The kind of thing you'd always want to be eating at work. For a long time in the 80s, that was how it worked too. People, particularly those working office and desk jobs, were very fond of this kind of lunch. It was also the perfect change in flavors from what people were originally used to. However, this was probably even more reliant on advanced preparation than egg salad stuffed tomatoes. That just wouldn't work with the way so many people were re-entering the workforce in the second half of the 20th century. It basically meant that your wife would have to stay at home and do kitchen duties every day, and most wives were opting to go to work instead. Labor-intensive meals like this, As a result, just didn't last in the long haul. Salisbury steak TV dinners were the one microwave meal that felt like a real supper, at least through the eyes of a hungry kid. The beef patties were tenderish, floating in thick brown gravy next to a scoop of mashed potatoes and a rectangle of corn. Sometimes there was a brownie hiding in the corner. It was a plastic tray of small comforts. The sound of that plastic film peeling back after the microwave dinged was almost ceremonial. You sat cross-legged on the carpet, TV glowing, fork in hand. The meat may have been spongy and the potatoes from a powder, but in the moment, it tasted like everything you needed. This was independence for a generation raised on fast solutions. Your parents were busy, you were hungry, and this box from the freezer aisle gave you a meal and a few minutes of peace. The packaging always promised Homestyle, but really, it was its own thing. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. So the techniques that people picked up with dumplings helped them out in other areas too, namely, making homemade bread. You'd pair that up with lard spread and onion slices, and you'd pretty much be eating as good as someone could be during the bowl and the Depression. What a time though, at least in retrospect. You have one of the worst economic crashes in documented history paired with Mother Nature having an equally historical fit. It's really no wonder that circumstances like that awoke the baker and home chef in a lot of people, probably just out of practicality. Anyway, back to homemade bread. So for this, all you'd need is flour. Most people were using all-purpose flour since it was cheaper to work with. Water, yeast, and salt were the rest of the gang. If you couldn't get your hands on some yeast, sourdough starter would work well too. Honestly, one of the hardest things to get was just the sugar needed for the brain, since granulated sugar was getting pretty hard to come by. Next, the lard spread. So during this time, people really started adopting the mentality of not wasting anything, not even a single part of the animal. That definitely meant all the lard too, which people would hold on to exactly for days like this. On its own, it doesn't exactly inspire an appetite though, but with some onion slices? You've had worse. Now, speaking of retro, tuna jelly salad was a really vintage recipe that started coming into the spotlight around the 60s. This was the time when Jell-O and gelatin mold-based dishes were getting really popular. The idea was to use the gelatin mold to encase the tuna with a typical salad dressing, and it really worked back then. I'm not exactly sure how people would react to it now, since I think the idea of a tuna and gelatin crossover is a bit too bold for a lot of people's palates. I could always be wrong though, so you tell me, dear viewer. Would you take a tuna jelly salad to work? Or would you just make a quick run for the nearest Wendy's? I wouldn't blame you at all if you picked the second one. The idea behind salads like these was to throw a spin on an otherwise really boring format of cooking. Salads were okay, but they were never something Americans preferred with their whole hearts. Nowadays, that opinion really started to become public sentiment. Plus, as I was previously talking about, most people would opt for Starbucks now. And I'll tell you this right now, tuna, Jell-O, and caffeine do not go together. Chicken cordon bleu casserole was the shortcut supper that turned a fancy French dish into a creamy, weeknight-friendly bake. You started with chopped chicken, leftover or canned. Add in cubed ham, a few slices of Swiss cheese, and a rich sauce made from sour cream or cream of chicken soup. It all went into a casserole dish and got baked until bubbly and golden on top. No stuffing, no rolling, just the flavors of chicken cordon bleu without the effort. This dish felt grown up, but it was easy enough for anyone to make. It tasted like something from a restaurant, even if it came from a bag of shredded cheese and a can of soup. It was a go-to for potlucks, holiday leftovers, or a random Tuesday night when you wanted something cozy but a little bit elevated. If your mother ever made it, you remember how the ham melted into the sauce and how the Swiss gave it that sharp edge that kept you coming back. Make one of these this week. Pick the rectangle pizza or the peanut butter bar and cook it in your own kitchen the way the lunch lady cooked it for you in 1986. Set your table with a paper napkin folded once. Eat from a plate, not the couch. These 25 lunches were never just food. They were the rhythm of an American childhood. The same trays sliding down the same lines for 20 straight years, fed to 27 million children every weekday. And then the rules changed and the trays went empty. Tell me in the comments which one you traded your dessert for and which one your own kid will never taste from a school tray.